Alright, so we're going to look at how we can build a calculator and build some features into it. So we've actually already got a calculator designed out. We've got the HTML and the CSS ready to go for it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have, when we click these buttons, it's going to show what we're clicking on up in this top box. And then when we hit equal down here, it's going to take the answer and put it in this second box. So if we go look at our HTML, we can kind of see what we've done. We've got a calculation box that we're going to target. We've got an answer box. And then we have a div with a class of keys that has all of our numbers and arithmetic operators inside of it. Then outside of that div class keys, we've got another button that is our equals button. So what we need to do is we've already got jQuery installed, so I need to go ahead and put in our document ready function. Then inside that function, we need two event listeners to start off with. We need one that listens for whenever one of the operator buttons are pushed, and then we need one for the equals button, because the equals button is going to do something completely different, so we need a separate event listener for that. So the easiest way to do that is to come in here and say .keys button, say on click, so we're listening for a click, and we set up our anonymous function that we want to execute when one of those buttons is clicked. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and set up our other one, which is going to be, we're going to use button name equals, in this case equals, as our selector. And so that is selecting this button down here that has a name attribute with the value of equals. And then we can just add an event listener to that, just like we did the previous one. So we open our function, close our function, close the method, end the line. Okay, so in the first one, we want to get the value of the button that was clicked. So these are buttons, and just like any of our form stuff, we can get the button value with the .val method, and we're going to assign that to, we want to get it for the button that we clicked on, so we're going to use this. So our event listener, since our event listener assigns to all the different buttons, we're wanting to just target the one that was clicked, and we're going to assign that to a variable. Then we're going to take that variable and we're going to grab where we want it to go, which is the div with a class of calculation right up here. We want it to display in there, but we want it to progressively, every time we click a button, we want to add that number in, or that operator into what we see. So we're going to use the append method, and we're going to append value to it. Alright, so if we run it, we'll see 1, and we'll see that every time we click a button, its value is appended. We can use plus and all that. So that's working for us. So then in our second one, where we have the equals button, we're saying whenever the equals button is clicked, we want to get the value that's up here, and we want to execute it. We want to actually run it and see what it would equal. And we can do that. Let's go ahead and actually grab the value first, and that's going to be as simple as getting that, saying .text, and let's assign that to a variable as well. So we're going to say var calc equals that. Then we're going to say, let's set up another variable that's going to be our answer, and we're going to use a built-in JavaScript function called eval, and we're going to pass calc to that. So we're going to take this string here, and the eval function is going to turn it into a math problem and calculate it out. And eval is basically going to, its default thing that we use it for is to actually convert a string and try to execute it as if it was JavaScript. And so since this would be, if this was in a JavaScript without being a string, it would actually calculate out to the variable. So that's going to do the trick for us. But then we want to take that answer, the result, and we want to output it to this second box. And so we can do, so the second box has a class of answer. Then we can use the text method to assign it there as well. So if we auto run this, we can say 14 plus 8. And we come down, we click the equals button, and we get the total down here. So we can keep going. There's other features we could add to our calculator. We might want to clear everything in this calculator. So we could add another button if we wanted to. So let's come down here and say button type equals button, value equals, in this case we're not using the value, so we don't care what it is. And let's just use a name of clear. I'll use CE is what people will see. So if you look down here, we now have a CE button, just like you see on a regular calculator. So let's set up an event listener for that. And this one's going to be very similar to the previous one where we say name equals, in this case, clear. We're going to set up a click event listener on this. There's our anonymous function. Close it, close the method and the line. So inside of this, we want to very simply just empty out both of these. You know, something's been executed. We say equals, we've actually got two values in here, and we want to be able to click this button and get rid of everything in both of these. And that would be just as simple as saying dot calculation dot text, and we're just going to pass an empty string back to it. So that should work well for us. And that empty string is going to overwrite whatever's in there and just set it back to blank. So if we run it and we do just like we did before, 14 equals, now we have two values, and if we click this clear button, we can see it got rid of both of them, just like we'd expect. So another thing we could do is to look and see, okay, right now if I do 14 plus something and hit equals, it shows me the string up here and then the result here. And I could keep on going. I could add more to this. And we could get a really long string. Now some people might prefer that so they can see if they made any typos while they're putting stuff in, while other people might want to, you know, once it's calculated, say, okay, this should say 21 plus 4 now. And so let's give people an option to choose which way they want it. Or they want to see the full string, or they want to see a compiled string with just the answer plus whatever new operation we add onto it. So we'll call this append, and we're actually going to add another button for that. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say button type equals value equals append. Again, we're not using the value here. We will be using the name, and let's just use AP as our button text. So if you scroll down here, we've got another button, and then we do very similar to what we've done on these as our selection. So we can say append. So in this function, we're going to do a few things. We're going to need to set some sort of variable that we can use to test whether someone has pushed that button or not, and then have that value of that variable to be available to everybody, to all the other functions as well. So what we can do is, outside of all of these event listeners, we can add in, we'll use a variable called append, and we'll say by default it equals true. So by default it's going to keep doing what it's doing. We're going to see that full string, and everything's going to keep appending. And we could say, okay, when this is clicked, let's say append equals false. So that means if we click it, now that variable is going to be false. But we kind of want to toggle back and forth, because we might want to turn this feature on and off. So we can come in and say, when this is clicked, if append equals true, then set it to false. Otherwise, or else, we want append to equal true. And so if we click on it once, it sets it to false. Then the next time it's going to set it to true. Then the time after that it's going to set it to false. And we've basically set up a little bit of a toggle here. Now that in and of itself doesn't quite do everything that we need, but now we've set a variable that we can use elsewhere. So we said we wanted to do something different based on when we hit the equals button. So we need to go up into our equals event listener up here and do a test there as well. And we're going to say if, we'll just kind of set this up. We're going to say if append does not equal true, then we want to do something. And this would be, by default, it's doing what we want. So we're going to say if it's been changed, then we want to do something different. In that case, we're going to want to set calculation text to be the answer instead of appending, instead of leaving it as it was. All right, so let's run this and see if it works yet. I'm going to say 14 plus 8 equals, and so this is the way it is by default. If I click AP and then I say, let's add something else and hit equals, then we'll see that after I hit equals, after I change that value, now it's going to give me that so that I can keep on working, and I'm adding on to that. So sometimes it's a little bit simpler to follow along that way. But now we've got another problem. I don't remember, or may not remember, whether I've clicked AP or not. So we need to kind of set some sort of way for us to, some sort of visual cue that we've made that change. And we can do that by going into the AP button, and we can say this, and we'll use toggle class. So every time, and we'll just set a class of active on it. So what toggle class is going to do is it's going to be every time that this event listener is changed, it's going to either add or remove a class depending on whether it existed or not. So if it's there, it's removed. If it's not there, it's added, and it's going to switch back and forth. And so as long as this is the only function that's changing the class, then it's going to sync up pretty well with our little if-then toggle statement up here as well. Okay, now I've already got a CSS class defined for active. It changes the background color and a few other things. So let's go back and rerun this. I'm going to say 14 plus 8. Again, this is using the default functionality, so that's doing it. Now if I click AP, you can see it changes the style and it stays like that. So then I could run the equal, and we can see it actually calculates up there. So now we've got a visual cue that has been turned on, and that should work out well for us. So let's add one more button on here. we're going to say, what if we mistype something and we want to back up one letter or one number or operator sign? So let's add another button. And we'll call this a back button. So we'll have a name equals back. Okay, so very similar to what we've done several times so far. We're going to say name equals our back. Set a click and our function. Okay, so in this one, we're going to use another built-in method in JavaScript that we haven't actually used before. But before we do that, we actually need to grab some other information. So we're going to say var calc equals, and we want to actually retrieve, since what we're going to be working on is this calculation field. So we're going to say dot calculation, and we're going to get the text of it. Then we're going to create another variable called short string, and that's going to be what we assign the value of the calculation minus one character. And then we'll add that back in, replace it back in our calculator. So the way we do this is we say calc.substring, or substr, and this expects two parameters. The first, what it's trying to do is grab a portion of the string. So since it's attached to calc, we're trying to grab a portion of that string, which in this case might be whatever this is. So we're trying to say we want to return this part and ignore that last character, and that's how we're going to basically hit, whenever we hit back, we're going to remove that last character. So substring accepts two arguments. The first one is the index of the character that we want to start with. So of course the first character in the string is 0, the next one is 1, so this character has an index of 0, next character has an index of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we don't actually know how long the string is, so we can't use hard-coded, but we can say we're going to start with the very first character. We know we're safe there. And then we're going to say calc.length minus 1. So just like in our for loop where we actually used the .length to say how many are in an array, length also works on a string to say how many characters are in it. And so we're going to say the first character is where we start. The second argument, this one right here, is where we want the substring to end. So we're saying we want it to end right before the last character. Now short string contains 124 plus. And so we just go in and set .calculation .text to short string. Alright, so let's run this and see if it works. And then hit the back button, and I see that it's backed up there. If I hit it again, I should have just 124. Alright, so just as I would expect. And that should be all for this tutorial.